a little bit longer. We'll see what happens next week if they're going to announce anything. It's hard even to speculate. There's so little in the way of details. What the items they agreed to were, what are the outstanding items, there's just no information. So they said it was productive, though. So there's that. And there'll be another forthcoming meeting potentially to finish the agreement, something like that. I don't know. So that's it. So I guess that's it. That's all we got. We got nothing. All right, well, that was a waste of time. Let's look at the live chat here. Nothing. No deal. Literally nothing. That's it. Yep. Let's take a look on Rerum Novarum if there's anything that's being reported in the press. Well, there's no agreement. It seemed congenial enough. What I will say is this. Here's the takeaway. All right? The takeaway is this. Going into the meeting, you got... Oh, here, let me get rid of this first. I guess I'll just reset it. Going into the meeting, the victory condition for Putin was really just to be here. This entire thing, this photo op, the fanfare, the ceremony, it's all a major victory for Putin. And I know it's been said probably 1,000 times already today, but all of this has to do with legitimacy. When Putin invaded Ukraine, the Biden administration sought to delegitimize the Russian regime and to delegitimize their war, not to recognize the territorial advances, not to recognize the Russian regime. And so, as I've said last night, as I've said in the past couple of weeks, the first move that Biden made in the previous administration was to completely isolate Russia, or attempt to isolate Russia diplomatically, to freeze all diplomatic economic relations, freeze their assets, suspend their access to the SWIFT system, U.S. financial and economic system, and even to suspend them from the Olympics and other diplomatic institutions. The charge is that Putin is a war criminal, and there is even talk of regime change in Russia. This is the level of diplomatic freezing that occurred in the last administration. When Trump took office again back in January, as we discussed, he's made many attempts to thaw those relations. He's had direct phone calls with Putin, as Putin himself alluded to in his statement. Steve Witkoff has made trips to Moscow. Marco Rubio met with Sergei Lavrov in Saudi Arabia at the beginning of the year. They reestablished communications. And this was the highest level meeting, obviously, so far. This is the first time Putin has been in America in 10 years. It's the first time a U.S. president has met with the Russian president since the previous Trump administration. And so this is a major win for Putin because it confers legitimacy upon the war. It says we are no longer undermining the Russian regime. Russia is no longer iced out of the international system. For this just to happen is a win for Putin. As far as Trump is concerned, it's a little more complicated. Trump needs a deal. And the architecture of the deal is very complicated. Because, of course, the concern on both sides is that there is this deep distrust. What Trump and Ukraine and NATO seek is a freezing of the battle lines. They want the war to stop. And the reason they want that is because the Russians are winning. The Russians are innovating in drone tactics and in other tactics using small teams of dismounted soldiers. And they're making a lot of progress on the battlefield. They're making a lot of tactical victories, especially in the past couple weeks. So the Russians are moving very quickly. The Ukrainian front line is collapsing. They're just out of manpower. They do not have enough manpower, cannot mobilize any additional manpower. And the American and NATO alliance are not able to keep up with equipment. Russia is producing millions of drones every year. And they're creating artillery shells and missiles many times the rate that the United States and Europe is. So it turned into attritional warfare sometime around 2023 is when the tactics began to shift, about a year into the war. And the United States and Europe are just not prepared to fight an attritional war. We do not have the industrial base to fight an attritional war. Ukraine does not have the population for an attritional war. And so as the war has dragged on over the past couple of years, although the progress has been slow going, over time, Russia has gradually seized the initiative and gained the upper hand. That's why in these summer offensives last year and this year, they've been making a lot of progress and gaining a lot of territory far more quickly than at any other time since the beginning of the war. So the imperative on the side of Trump and Ukraine is they just want to stop Russia. They want to stop the Russian advance because the Ukraine front line is at risk of falling apart and it's a complete Russian breakthrough. So the Ukrainians, NATO, the United States, they just want it to stop. And by the way, make no mistake about it. When Trump says, I just want to stop the killing, that's rhetoric. That's rhetoric. When Trump says, we just want to bring an end to the war, and stop the fighting and all this, that's rhetorical. Do not buy that for even 2 seconds. Because the easiest way to stop the war is surrender. You want to end the war? Then cut off all the aid to Ukraine, and the Ukrainian front line will collapse, and Ukraine would lose the war, or they would be forced to unconditionally surrender. So when they say, well, hey, man, we're just ready to, if we could all just put her there, let's just finish this war, that's rhetoric. And what it constitutes is a shift in what the West is willing to accept from Russia. Because under the Biden administration, there was this idea that Ukraine was going to retake all of the lost territory, that they were going to retake Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson, Zaporizhia. They were going to take all that back, maybe even Crimea. They were going to take all the territory back, that they would not accept any Russian occupation. They would not accept any Russian annexation. They were going to fight it through to the bitter end, to victory. That was the rhetoric under the Biden administration. You are isolated. You are frozen out. The Russian regime, its days are numbered. We're going to overturn all of these territorial losses. It's going to be over for you. And all of that has shifted in the other direction. That is not going to happen. And I think the West realized that's not going to happen. I think in some ways, maybe that is why Trump was allowed to win. One of the benefits of a democracy is that it actually affords diplomatic latitude. Maybe this sounds like conspiracy stuff, but to have a more friendly face come into Washington, it lets Washington save face, actually. Because ordinarily, if you just had one regime from 2022 until today, it would be a very significant about face. To go from Putin is a war criminal, we need to overthrow him, we are not going to accept any territorial losses, to now what they're saying is, well, hey, let's just stop the fighting. Let's just freeze the battle lines where they are. You can keep what you've gotten so far. If it was one consistent regime, that would be a defeat. But if you have a regime change, if it goes from Biden to Trump, and Donald Trump rides in on this opposition to the war from the public, then Trump can say, well, there's a new sheriff in town, new leadership, we want to end the war. And so now the new line is, well, let's just freeze the battle lines where they are. Let's just stop. But of course, this benefits the American side. For Trump to say, let's just stop the fighting, that's very convenient because now Russia's winning. So Trump says, let's just call it quits. We just don't want to see anyone die anymore. It's super convenient now that Russia is about to break through and they're about to take the whole thing. They're making these rapid gains. Of course, the American side just wants to shut it all down. Here's the problem. There's immense distrust on both sides that they will adhere to any kind of agreement. Putin knows that if we just stop the fighting right now, that is going to give the advantage to the Ukrainians. They get to mobilize more personnel. They get more equipment from NATO and from the United States. So Putin has said that the condition for a ceasefire, he said this in Turkey in June, Putin said, my condition for a 30-day temporary ceasefire is you have to demobilize. You have to leave the territories that we have occupied. The United States and NATO cannot send any more weapons shipments, and Ukraine cannot mobilize any additional personnel, because otherwise, why would we stop? You want to call a timeout because you're losing. And when you call a timeout, then you're just going to consolidate and gather strength for the second round. You're going to lay more mines. You're going to lay more defensive fortifications, mobilize more manpowered equipment. Why would we call a timeout right now? On the flip side, with the Americans and the Ukrainians are seeking security guarantees. Because even if Putin agrees to a ceasefire or a comprehensive peace, the big concern is that on a long enough timeline, Russia will fortify. Russia will consolidate their forces. And so if Russia has come this far, if they already invaded, if Russia succeeds in taking NATO membership off the table for Ukraine, and Ukraine is no longer able to access that defensive treaty and then have protection from the United States and Europe, Ukraine is concerned that what would stop Russia from starting the war all over again? If they were willing to do it the first time, absent a defensive alliance with the United States and Europe, Russia will once again try to test whatever ceasefire line is created. They will test it. They will push on it. Eventually, they might reinvade and go for more territory, either to take the entire coast of the Black Sea or take the capital, cross the Dnieper River. They're going to come for more. So Ukraine wants America to be in Ukraine. Ukraine says we need security guarantees, defensive guarantees. But what's the architecture of the deal then? Because what Russia is asking for is that Ukraine can never join NATO. Because if Ukraine joins NATO, that means American missiles and troops and equipment on Russia's border. But for Ukraine to feel safe, they're going to need some guarantees. Maybe they can't join NATO, but they would feel more comfortable if they had an American or NATO presence inside their country. But at that point, it's a distinction without a difference. If they have a Western security guarantee, that's not much different than Ukraine being in NATO. And that is something that is non-negotiable. That's a non-starter for the Russian side. So this is where they bring in the minerals deal. And Trump said that there's a scenario where Russia and America mutually can exploit Ukraine's critical minerals and energy resources. And if there's some kind of commercial partnership, then they would be bound together by economic ties. And there would not be an interest in going to war. If they could de-escalate some of the tension between Washington and Moscow, then there'd be less of a risk that either side would try to test the ceasefire line, try to test those boundaries. But of course, if the United States is involved in a mineral deal, then there's going to be an American presence. What does that mean? If Americans are in Ukraine extracting minerals and energy, there's going to be an American security footprint there as well. And if there's an American civilian and security footprint in Ukraine, then if Russia tries to test those ceasefire lines, they're going to wind up shooting Americans. And so once again, it effectively becomes a NATO outpost, but without calling it that. So the question of the deal is, how do you install a tripwire? How do you install a tripwire for the Russians where they will not test those boundaries such that Ukraine is satisfied, but also without creating another security risk for Russia? That's really the architecture of the deal. So I'm sure that's what was discussed on some level at the meeting, is how do you kind of make it so that everybody's happy? How do you make it so that Ukraine feels safe, but Russia doesn't feel threatened? How do you create a tripwire in Ukraine without having Ukraine join NATO? And I think the solution looks something like, as Putin said, a comprehensive cooperation between the United States and Russia. And he mentioned some of those areas of cooperation, like mineral extraction, like trade, also the Arctic. That's a major area of mutual cooperation, and Russia seeks to kick China out of the Arctic. That's actually where Russia and the United States can work together against China. So that was one thing that was suggested in Putin's remarks. But as of right now, we have no idea what that's going to look like. If it's anything like the mineral deal, what things that Putin said in Istanbul in June are going to be agreed upon, where he's compromised, we don't know. Because we sort of know where Russia is at. Like I said last night, they articulated what they expect from a 30-day ceasefire. They articulated what they expect from a comprehensive peace. They've said that at least 3 times this year at different meetings. It's the United States position that has to be a little bit more flexible because we're also dealing with Ukraine and with the European Union. So I guess we'll have to wait and see. We're going to take a look at Rerum Novarum. We'll see if there's any additional details here on Twitter. Any breaking news? Oh, interesting. So what was supposed to take place today was a one-on-one meeting that, as I said, evolved into a 4-on-4 meeting. And then they were supposed to hold a luncheon and then a press conference. The meeting went on for 3 hours. It went on 2 hours over the allotted time. They then held the press conference, and it looks like the luncheon was canceled. So I don't know if that's a good sign or a bad sign, but the lunch got canceled. It says now Trump is returning to the White House immediately. Okay, and this is just recapping the press conference. Trump says there's no deal until there's a deal. So, as I was saying before, the victory condition for Putin here was to achieve this diplomatic thaw without giving anything in return, and that's basically what happened. There is no ceasefire. There's no agreement. There doesn't even seem to be a concrete plan for a second round of talks. So what was really achieved here? We don't know. They haven't said. Both sides have said it was constructive and positive. They met for a very long time. At the same time, they canceled the lunch. And there's nothing. There is no agreement. There is no future talk scheduled. So Putin achieved what he came here to get. He got the meeting. He came on American soil, shook hands with the president. He got the photo op. It's a major win for Putin. As far as Trump is concerned, and I said this last night, I think this is purely for him for the photo op. This does nothing for the American side. The only way to stop this war is to put additional pressure on Russia. That's it. By arming Ukraine, additional sanctions on Russia. Otherwise, it's an unequivocal surrender, an unconditional surrender. That's it. You either need to fight the war and win the war, or make it such that the cost of continuing is such that Putin will come to an agreement, which Trump seems unwilling to do because we're just out of options. Short of arming Ukraine with long-range weapon systems that can hit Moscow, short of secondary sanctions that are going to hurt the prospect of a trade deal with India and China, short of putting restrictions on Russian energy that are going to hurt our economy, there's nothing else we can do to Russia. Every option is unattractive to escalate against Russia. We're unwilling to do any of these things. So Trump has been issuing these ultimatums saying if Putin does not come to the table, we're going to put the screws in. But we're unwilling to escalate. There are no options left on the table for us to escalate where we're okay with the cost or the risk. So this is where Trump, in order to save face a couple of weeks ago, to back down from his ultimatum, said, okay, well, we don't need to impose secondary sanctions because we have this meeting with Putin. But that does nothing for us. Putin gets to come here and then go home and continue the war. Maybe this is all premature. Maybe there was some breakthrough. But if there was, we don't have it on paper yet. So Trump said he's calling NATO, he's calling Ukraine, he's going to run it by them. Maybe there'll be a forthcoming meeting. We don't know that. But as it stands, the war in Ukraine is still active. But Putin got the meeting anyway. So, you know, you just got to wonder, what is the end game here on the part of the United States? They should just cut the aid to Ukraine. Ukraine does not want to give up the territory. Let the front line collapse. Cut the aid, let Ukraine fail, and let them deal with Russia. If you really want the war to end. But of course, we're not privy to all the negotiations behind the scenes. We don't know what Trump is saying to Zelensky. We don't know the conversation with Putin. I guess we'll have to see what happens next week if there's any announcements, or I'm sure there will be leaks. I'm sure there'll be some planted story in the coming days that will tell us generally what happened during the meeting. But as of right now, we just have no idea. But it seems like it was a whole lot of nothing. Seems like it was a big farce. And we got another update. They're going to let the D.C. police remain in control of the police department. Okay, that's not really related. All right, well, that's your Trump-Putin summit. Not a whole lot going on. Yeah, I guess that's it. A whole lot of nothing. We'll see if there's another live feed. Yeah, no, all the live feeds are over. Okay. So the whole thing was just a photo op. I said this last night. I said the whole thing is just going to be a photo op. This is about Trump saving face. This is about performing diplomacy. There's just nothing real here. There's nothing real here. You know, nothing, as far as we can tell, has fundamentally changed here. And they can go up and say that they made a lot of progress, but they don't have a deal. They don't have an agreement. And it's very likely, by the way, that the Russians came here with no intention of making a deal. That the Russians came here really in order to lead the Americans on. And to make commitments and make promises. And even Putin said in his remarks, he said, we'll have to hope that the Europeans won't do anything provocative that might sabotage the agreement or the progress that has been made. Putin is still trying to split apart the Western alliance. He's still, with that little barb that was thrown in there. And it's not to say that there aren't legitimate divisions within the Western alliance, but for him to say that, sort of interesting. And then even at the end, when he said, maybe we'll meet in Moscow, talk about a humiliation ritual. Let's meet in Moscow this time. He got everything he wanted. So he'll go home to Russia and they'll continue their advance, I think. And this whole thing seems to have just been a big ceremony, like everything else so far in this administration. And here's the bottom line. Throughout the entire year, the bottom line throughout the whole year is that Trump is always making these big threats and big ultimatums and big demands, and he does not follow through. He said to China, if you put reciprocal tariffs on us, you're going to regret it. And China did it. And it was the White House begging for China to negotiate. And Trump said he would destroy the Houthis. And after 30 days, they gave up and said, oh, they're very tough fighters. We don't want any more of this. He said Iran had 60 days to make an agreement. And outside of the 60 days, it was Israel that bombed Iran. And 2 weeks later, Trump came in after being pressured by them to intervene. Here's the point. Whatever you think about these various things, obviously, I don't believe we should have bombed Iran or bombed the Houthis or anything like that. Whatever you think about any of this stuff, as a leader, you cannot make commitments like this. You cannot draw red lines that you're not willing to enforce. Deterrence is the law of the jungle on the world stage. And what is inherent in deterrence is credibility. It's not just the capability to use force, it is the credibility that you're willing to use force. It's both of those things. That is the bedrock of American hegemony. That is the bedrock of global security. It is deterrence, and it is founded on the capability to use force, but the credibility that you're willing to use it when you say you're going to. For Trump to constantly make these ultimatums and demands, you better make an agreement, you better do this or that, you've got 60 days, 50 days, 10 days, and don't follow up. And you can see it. This isn't just me saying this. Trump gave an ultimatum to Putin. He said, you have 50 days. Putin said, I don't care. Trump said, okay, well, now you have 10 days. And Putin said, I don't care. And then Trump, at the last minute, sent Steve Witkoff to Moscow and begged for a meeting. And finally, the White House agreed to the meeting that Putin had sought since the beginning of the year. And Trump said, oh, we don't need to follow through on our threat. Oh, remember that 10-day ultimatum? We don't actually need to do anything because Putin agreed to have a meeting. They actually requested a meeting. So do you think Putin takes Trump seriously? When Trump says, you've got 50 days, 10 days, please meet with us. Oh, okay, we don't need to enforce it. We have a meeting coming up. Putin does not take Trump seriously. And what is Trump going to do? What can he reasonably do? Russia has all the cards here. They have the advantage in drones. In tactics and in equipment. They have the advantage in artillery. They have the advantage in personnel. They have the advantage in tactics. And they're winning. So unless Trump is willing to give another major round of aid to Ukraine, which he certainly does not want to do, unless Trump is willing to give them another $50 billion package or give them long-range missiles, and they're going to need to escalate because Ukraine doesn't have the manpower, unless Trump is willing to really escalate it economically or militarily, there's no options here. So I guess we'll have to wait and see next week if anything at all happened today. Because it seems like nothing happened. It seems like nothing happened, actually. And, of course, Trump had to maybe drag it out and maybe go on a press conference afterward. This is speculation. Maybe Trump felt he needed to go on the press conference and say, we're so close to a deal and all this kind of stuff. When in reality, maybe nothing like that actually occurred. We don't know. We'll have to see what happens next week. But that is our Trump-Russia summit. Doesn't seem great. Gonna be honest with you, doesn't seem like they achieve much of anything, but like I said, we're gonna watch it and we'll see what happens next week. But that's it for this stream. Thank you guys for tuning in. That's all I got for you. I wish I had more, but there's no content. I wish I had more to tell you, more to give you, but I mean, we saw the press conference. We waited all day for that. I waited all day. We waited like 4 hours for this. Content cucked. Let's see what we got from Rerum Novarum. The negotiations have ended. Okay, so it's over. It ended early. Let's see, are they going to air? There's supposed to be an interview with Brett Baer. Is that going to be released anytime soon? God, I'm not going to wait for it. I don't care that much. All right, well, that's all I got for you. That's my coverage. I am going to do a show tonight, later tonight, so stay tuned for that. I'll be back later and we'll recap. If there's an interview, maybe we'll watch it. I don't know. There's no news happening today. This is like the slowest, most brutal news week ever. So, I don't know. Maybe I'll do a show. Maybe I won't. If I do, maybe I'll watch the interview later. I don't know what my plan is yet for today. So, stay tuned to Telegram. Stay tuned to Twitter. I'll let you know. I might do a show. There's really nothing to cover here. You know, we talked about it a little bit. There's nothing really, no updates. So, I might do a show and do a little recap. I might not. If there's an interview, maybe I'll cover that instead. But I will let you know on Telegram. I'll let you know on Twitter. For now, that's all I got for you. Thank you for tuning in. Smash the like button. Subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think. And I will see you later. Thanks for watching.
Americanism, not globalism, will be our credo. It's going to be only America first. America first.